Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to 22 Panels, where my guest today is Dennis Kitchen. It's one of those times where, I just felt like talking to him again. So I made up an excuse. Hey, Dennis.
Hey Ted.
You had an auction that you wanted to plug. So let's do that before I
Well,
forget.
that's true for all of your well-heeled listeners.
I might
Yeah,
have one or two.
I decided a while back it was time to put my art collection up for grabs. So the auction is Friday, April 5th, and Sunday the 7th,
Okay.
and they've got close to 300 pieces.
And who's
So
who's got it?
what's
Wh-
that?
Where's the auction going to be through?
Oh, Heritage.
Heritage.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, if you
So
want any great kitchen sink work, including you were saying the Eisner cover of Snarf, which
yeah, that's one of the headliners, and there's some wonderful Crumb and Kurtzman and Mark Schultz and just I mean I don't want to boast, but I'm proud of what I assembled over many years.
you're
Um,
saying that as a premier underground comics publisher, you managed to assemble a premier collection of underground original comics art. I'm shocked,
yes,
shocked to
I can
discover that
tell
there's
you are
gambling in
genuinely
this
shocked. Yeah.
establishment.
Well, keep in mind, back in the day, it's not like I was throwing out $100 bills at people, but
No,
it was an era where there was a lot of swapping going on and
right.
casual stuff between friends, and so it took a while before I was even in a position where I could pay any significant amount for items. But I mean, I think any collector who's not born with a silver spoon in their mouth has to do it the same way. You acquire what you can afford, and the main thing is to have a good eye. I always tell
Yeah.
someone who's interested in collecting comic art, and they tell me, well, I don't really have money to spend on the good stuff. It's like go to any convention, and there's going to be artists who are 20 something and they haven't established their career yet. But if you have a good eye, you know who's the next Chris Ware, who's the next Dan Clowes, who's the next, Raina Tagmeyer, whatever your eye will tell you. And if you trust your eye, you can usually buy things directly from an artist at a pretty reasonable price. And
Yeah.
you should get it because you love it. But if in 10 years or 20 years you go, oh my God, what a smart investment that was, that's a bonus. But buy stuff that you want to hang on your wall and look at. And that's what I
Well,
did. And, some of the people I collected, they're not terribly valued by the market standards. Others are. But, I loved Ernie Bushmiller before most people would admit that. So
nice.
you have to trust your own taste, and don't worry if the market tells you, oh, you have to have an Iron Man cover. If an indie artist appeals to you, buy something by that indie artist. You're just because you might have guests who come to your home and they know the Marvel superheroes through the movies, and they might go, "Oh, wow, you've got a Hulk cover, whatever." I mean, don't get them unless you like them.
Well,
If
that's
Uncle Charlie doesn't like your independent artist cover, so what? It's not for him.
that's actually what I tell anybody coming in. Uh, I've worked at various comic shops through my life, and there's always the people that are like, "Oh, what's going to be worth money?" I'm like, "Yeah, if you're buying to make it worth money, you're in the wrong game." Um,
Right, right.
with rare exceptions, the second you're buying it to make money, you're likely to be the one that the money is made off of at some point. Some things will always go up and other things, kind of hit their peak. And if you buy them at the peak, that means that um you're the guy.
Yeah, yeah. I think
um
that's a good general rule.
whereas I mean, and I was quickly looking for there was I remember there was article about a few years ago, a couple of like city workers in New York that had one of the most valuable art collections in the world. And it
Hmm.
was just because they were just art enthusiasts. They had
Yeah,
never paid more than a few $100s for
yeah,
anything. They just gotten everything before the people were known.
that's
Y
right.
you know, that
That's the key. Yeah.
they'd frequented any number of um maybe it's this one, any number of uh, local smaller galleries. They weren't
Yeah,
going to the big, huge galas, but in doing that,
exactly.
they were able to meet the people before. I remember that actually the biggest problem was that their collection was so big and they wanted it to stay together. They weren't even trying to sell it. They were trying to find a
Huh.
museum that would take the whole thing.
Right. Like
Um,
the Gardner Museum or the one in Philly where it's a
right,
museum dedicated to a single collection. Those are rare.
right. Yeah. I think it actually wound up being the Smithsonian that bought it
Hmm.
and that they set up like and I could be wrong because I'm not finding it quickly, but they set up like a rotating exhibit. They made a space and it would rotate through,
Okay.
every 3 or 4 months change what was up. But yeah, that sounds like a lot of what you did, and I imagine it's what you did as a publisher too. You'd
Well, yeah, part of the
see.
fun of being a publisher was getting surprises in the mail, submissions of new people, or, just discovering someone at a convention when maybe they first start exhibiting. And again, just trusting your taste. With a graphic novel, it's more than just the art, of course. Is there a good story here and whatnot? But what I tried to do, I put out several anthologies, and an anthology is a way, I can have a cover by someone recognizable, a lead story by someone with an established following, but that second or third or fourth story can be by a total unknown because I knew the readers of that anthology would trust that they get their money's worth. And that's a good way to get someone a foot in the door. And if they're well received, then, you put them in another anthology, and before long, they've got their own book.
Yeah, I've actually been really pleased that anthology comics um, seem to be uh, not quite returning to the level they once were, but Oni just bought or came to an agreement with uh the Gaines family to use the EC label on new titles. They're not putting out the old titles. They came up with new titles for
Yeah, I'm
horror and
surprised the Gaines family did that,
yeah.
honestly, because that I would think would be a brand they'd be very protective of. But
And it sounds like it took a lot to convince them, and based on what I've seen in terms of early creators, they take the brand seriously.
all right,
Um,
time will tell, right?
yeah, absolutely. Um, absolutely. And I think that's also why they weren't allowed to do like a Tales from the Crypt or anything like that. They had to come up with new titles that fit the brand.
Right.
Um, Anthologies are also really popular on Kickstarter, and that's another thing that I love is you get that one or two, as you were saying, the one or two creators that people are going to buy because this has a Mike Oming story or this has a
Mhm.
Chris Cantwell story, but then you get to explore all of these other new creators. Um, the last time we talked, you mentioned that your favorite thing that you published was Snarf, and I hadn't like explored it much at that time, so I had to. And it is
Okay.
an anthology. It's for people who haven't come across it, and it's not easy to find copies other than the ones you still have and can be ordered from your website. So
Yeah,
plug
there's still
to
a few back
Pitch.
issues left, but
Right.
yeah,
it
well, yeah.
it's like Underground meets Mad Magazine, and I dig it. So talk to me about Snarf, how it came about.
Well, one of the things I thought back in the underground comics days when our market, remember, was really hippies reached through head shops. This is the pre-comic shop era, if your younger readers can wrap their head around that.
And for the younger readers who don't know what a head shop is, because there was a time where I had to look that up myself. It's a place where you bought paraphernalia, but absolutely positively not illegal drugs. They certainly didn't have any illegal drugs in the back
They
of the
were
room
meant
or anything
for
like that. They sold water pipes as art. And
tobacco purposes only, Ted.
right, right.
So, so anyway, so most of those shops would have a spinner rack or a wall rack with underground comics, and aside from like the Furry Freak Brothers and some of Crumb and some, I mean, in general, humor was not to me not as prevalent as it should be, and so Snarf was an attempt to get together cartoonists who could do funny things. And the other thing I wanted to do with it that I think I accomplished, at least early on, was I wanted to alternate the covers between established underground cartoonists and then the older veteran cartoonists that I respected, who were not necessarily known to the hippies going into these head
Right.
shops. And it was a self-satisfying thing. So, as I'm sure you saw early on, I got Will Eisner was the first thing he did coming out of kind of comic book retirement. Um, got Harvey Kurtzman to do one,
Is it Will Elder
Will
cover?
Elder, and
Yeah.
so on. And and then I would alternate them with people like Crumb or Jay Lynch or myself or
Right.
on the list. So throughout the run of it, and even inside, I even got like Basil Wolverton to contribute. And I never thought, I never believed there was this crazy thing that I think a guy named Jerry Rubin, who was a self-styled leader of the hippie movement, who said, never trust anyone over 30. I always thought that was a load of crap. And
What did he say when he turned 30?
I think he became a stockbroker, and I'm not even joking.
I
Um,
believe that actually. Um, yeah,
so
no,
so so that was the attempt was to have a good mix that I thought the audience would appreciate, but also to bring in some of the previous generation. So there was some cross-pollinization. I guess that's a term maybe that works.
I like that term. I like that term. Well, and I mean, uh, there are definitely a mixture of styles and whatnot as you get a lot in the underground comics, but I feel like it's a cross-pollinization already because it does have very quickly, to me at least, and I adore Mad Magazine, so anything that's gonna be similar is going to have that feel to me. So,
Okay.
but it
Well, good.
has that mad feel in terms
Sure.
of
Well,
we're taking pot shots at establishment. We're taking pot shots at ourselves. I mean, I like how there are stories that make fun of the culture that it's aimed at, as well as sticking it to the man, whatever. Um, and I love that and I didn't have the time to like research, how early, but you've got the established people, but like the deeper into it, it's like, oh, and now here's a Trina Robbins story, and she'd been around, but yeah, now here's Rick Geary, and then um Joe Matt shows up in later ones, and
I think he made his professional debut in Snarf.
that's one of the things I was wondering.
Yeah.
Harvey Picar has a couple of stories.
Yeah.
Uh,
Think some of the earliest Howard Cruz also.
yeah, Howard
So,
Cruz.
so again, it was a place to showcase people who ultimately carved out, obviously very strong careers. But
Yeah,
you need stepping stones when you're young and looking for a break. And so, what I liked about being a publisher, on a very small, tiny scale, of course, you get to play God in a way. You get to
Yeah.
go, okay, I'm going to give this person a shot or that person. But at the same time, you still have to be at least a competent editor and art director. And uh, there would be times when I would get something from someone I knew and trusted, and it would be weak. And the hardest part for me was then saying to someone, I just don't think this is a strong enough one. And that always hurts. So you have to have that emotional distance. At the same time, you've got to be the cheerleader. And I learned early on, being a publisher, you had to wear a lot of hats from being an authority figure. Sometimes you had to be, the priest confessor and listen to the problems. Sometimes you
Right.
had to be the bank and give them an advance when you really couldn't easily hand out
Right.
advances. Had to be a combination of things. And I think the success of a publisher, and I would extend that to the key staff, is you have to have an emotional range to be able to deal with artists who, generally speaking, can be how should I put it? Sometimes emotionally unstable or needy or ultra sensitive, and
The comics world does tend to attract, um, I like to call us lovable loners. We like the
yeah,
comics world because we're not
yeah,
loners anymore. It's our tribe.
yeah. It was
Um,
also it was in the days before any of us knew what the word autism meant or the
right.
spectrum,
Yep. Yep.
Um, I remember at one point telling Crumb, you're on the spectrum, man. And he said, yeah, other people have told me that too, but he said, I don't believe it. He didn't really look into it because he wasn't interested, I don't think, in.
Well, I mean, as somebody who, when I was in school, I was too smart for anybody to consider that I was special ed. I
Yeah.
had terrible study habits, but I'd ace the tests or teach the other kids or whatnot. And didn't struggle until I was at the point where people wouldn't cut me slack for just being smart, and or I was like the only person pushing myself. And as an adult working in special education and with autism and whatnot, is when I understand that I've lived we have a better idea of what autism is today. If I was
Yep.
if I was in school today, I likely would have been diagnosed on the spectrum and gotten a different set of helps and whatnot. Um, and absolutely, I agree with you. All over comics on people on the
Well,
spectrum. One of my
yeah,
favorite anthologies from last year was actually a it was called Sensory, and it was a an
hmm.
anthology put together
I've
about
heard of
life
it.
on the
I haven't
spectrum,
seen it. Is it,
all by people on the
no?
spectrum.
Was it, you think it worked?
I
Mhm.
did. I thought it was, I mean, as with any anthology, there were things that I liked more than others.
All right.
Um,
I got to write that down. Sensory?
Sensory
Yeah.
was
Okay.
actually up for an Eisner even. I
Oh,
remember
that's where I've heard of it. Okay.
and the I remember the editor of it had to had to go fund me to get the money to get from England to San Diego for the Eisners. Because that's comics. But I plugged that GoFundMe like you wouldn't believe, because I was sitting there going, yeah, it's just cool that this exists. Um, it was nice to see that Bex got to make it. I'm going to throw it in the chat, link to the publisher page in the chat for you. Um, but yeah,
Hmm.
no, the more I get to know comics creators, the more I get to know about autism because I work in it. Yeah, comics attracts people on the spectrum. Um, there's a lot of science that could probably even be done on that, seeing as comics are a medium that require using both sides of your brain. They require um, more engagement from a reader
Mhm.
than any other medium. So it's probably not surprising that people that are neuroatypical would be that
Yeah.
much more attracted to them.
Yeah, absolutely. My youngest daughter, Violet, is autistic. She's an amazing cartoonist.
Yeah, I've looked at some of her stuff since the last
Uh,
time we talked.
yeah, if any of your readers are curious, you can find her on Instagram where she posts some stories that are very self-reflective about, uh, you know, dealing with issues that are spectrum related. And yeah, for whatever reason, a disproportionate amount. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, as you bring up that, and I like just flowing with conversations, so I'm gonna just run with that. Because I think that there's a through line between um underground comics and um particularly, the Crumbs and the Justin Greens that started getting into much more autobiographical, even while trying to be shocking and over the top. And both the Instagram comics scene now, your Alison Bechtels, your autobiographical comics have become a thing in a way that I don't think you see in other mediums. I mean, autobiographies and books are almost exclusively for I was a big important person, read my story,
right.
right? Autobiographical comics are I'm me and need to tell my story. Here it is.
Yeah, no,
Um,
there's no question. And, it really started with Justin Green and Binky Brown meets the Holy Virgin Mary.
yeah,
Even, Will Eisner did a lot of
he did.
autobiographical graphic novels, but not before he read Justin Green and Jack Jackson in particular, underground artists, and it touched him in a way where it affected his own approach. Instead of dealing with a character like the Spirit or totally fictional characters, both of which he did very well, he started to look inward. And so, a couple of his autobiographical uh, graphic novels are very overtly autobiographical. Some are more subtly. But when he ran out of basically all the stories inspired by his own life, one of his later graphic novels is based on his wife Anne's family.
Right,
And so it's more biographical, I suppose you'd say, but he was part of it.
right.
And that one is called Name of the Game, and
That's a
it's
great
not one of
book.
his better known ones. But I
No,
would
but it's
I
great.
would urge your readers who are Eisner fans who may have it or are curious to
It's
even if they've
part
read it, I would
of
say reread it with the man has it within reach probably.
probably my favorite Eisner volume. And it's out of print, but it can still be found. Is the Life in Pictures, which has
Yes.
The Dreamer, To the Heart of the Storm, The Name of the Game, and then a short called The Day I Became a Professional.
Yep.
And an editor's note, as it turns out, by Dennis Kitchen. I just saw that.
Yeah, he
um,
pops up everywhere, I know.
yeah, and an introduction by Scott McCloud. So I mean, those alone are worth buying the book if you can find it. I didn't even find it with a cover. I have mine.
I
Mine.
was gonna say it, yeah, it
Yeah,
needs a dust jacket.
yeah. No, no. I haven't found one with a dust jacket in the price range that I'm willing to like
Well,
spend one day, or
you
maybe it'll go back to print one day because again, it's a great volume. Um,
well, I'm glad you like it. Yeah, it if you haven't read Name of the Game in a while, I would urge you to reread it with this in mind. So it's a story of Anne's family, and in real life, when Will proposed to Anne, he was I think 35, and Anne was about 30, and he still felt he needed to ask his future father-in-law for permission. It was that kind of you know, a formality.
Right.
And her father was a stockbroker, and they lived a very comfortable life. And in fact, he would not even give Will his blessing or his permission until he saw Will's bank book, which Will provided. And then the stockbroker then blinked at it a couple of times and said, "Okay, you have permission." He didn't realize how successful Will was.
Right.
But the point of the story is, after they married, Anne's father said, "Look, I know you're good at what you do," but he said, "I'm offering you an opportunity to join my brokerage firm, and you could eventually become a partner and enjoy that kind of success in a more, how shall we say, respectable manner." And Will, to his credit, said, "With all due respect, I'm going to stick with what I know best, but thank you."
Yeah.
So I'm telling you that anecdote because if you read the name of the game, and it's Anne's family this story is built around, everything builds to a point where I think Rose is her name in name of the game. She falls in love with not a cartoonist, but a poet. So the poet is the stand-in for Will, which you wouldn't know without this backstory. So they get married, and she loves this poet. He's a great guy, but he's also given the opportunity to join the stock firm, and he says yes. And then he proceeds to be the worst son of a bitch you can imagine, including he's a wife beater, he's an alcoholic, go down the list. So that was Will's what if story.
I love it.
and and I love it because he was able to look at his decision and say, what if I had done that? And might not have worked out, but it's
Well,
kind of
I
a
mean,
joke.
it also it shows insight into a couple of different things. Um, the first being that, if you have something that you're passionate about and can do, um, leaving it behind is likely to leave a hole, But the second, that's, probably all too prescient in this age, as we have altogether too many uh old white men in power who have never had anybody to say no to them.
Huh.
um, is what was being presented to him was, oh, well, I mean, you're very successful, but you work for a living. I can allow you not to work for a living and have the same
Yeah.
level of success and just be prestigious rather than um
I'm sure one of your stockbrokers is listening and will take umbrage at that, but point
I
taken.
mean,
Yeah.
thankfully I don't have any stockbrokers. I mean, maybe not thankfully, because my retirement would be much more secure if I had some. But
Well,
I come by it honestly. I have corporate lawyers in the family, one of which never stopped drinking the Kool-Aid, and the other which is uh, in his retirement becoming a little bit more aware of the
hmm,
people that he used to
hmm,
spend a lot of time around. Um, and yeah, that to me is one of the beauties of comics in general, though, is whether it's by mocking them or twisting them into a different story. I like, we mentioned EC Comics briefly. Why can I never remember the name of the astronaut story? It's like the most famous EC Comics story.
oh, yeah.
Um,
I can't remember the name offhand either, but I certainly know the story. Yeah.
uh, Judgment Day.
Yeah.
Um, whether subtly or much more overtly, comics forever have put a lens on power, on cynicism, on um hypocrisy. You know, one of my pet theories, and I'm certain that somebody could find a way to take comics and use them for evil if they wanted to, but is, you know, going back to what we were talking about with comics requiring both sides of your brain, comics telling stories on multiple levels and whatnot, it's much harder to tell lies through comics than truth.
Hmm.
Um, because to make the lies work on every level, to not have the pictures tell the tale while the words are saying what, you know, requires a level of coordination that just seems much more difficult. You know, I mean, so many of the lies that we even build our society around, you know, trickle down economics, how many people still believe in it, and they certainly still preach it as
Well, you just haven't seen the best propaganda comics, Ted. You know.
well, no, I'm certain that it can be
That,
done.
yes, absolutely.
I mean, everything can be done, and for that matter, in comics, that's even more so
Right.
true.
Because remember, we're in a world of comics that are done for, shall we say, art and literature's sake. But comics as a medium um, are capable of doing anything, as we know, educating
Right.
or distorting history, if you so choose. If you were a dictator and you wanted to get across the history you wanted, you could give kids graphic novels that would give a distorted version, and they would believe it as much as they believed any other propaganda, perhaps more so. So, yeah, remember, anything can be manipulated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, as somebody who's read a lot of comics, mostly good ones, but some bad ones, I tend to think that it would be hard to make the empathy come through if it
Well,
was faked.
that's, I hope you're right.
It would
Yeah.
be hard. It would be much harder to make those kids see themselves if they weren't living that. You know, if you're trying to say I'm a dictator and the world is so much better because of this, to find a way to have the kids actually see that when they have the pictures and the words to sit back. I mean, it might not succeed in making them decide that it's not true, but I don't think, I hope. I mean, I'll completely acknowledge being an eternal optimist. Um, I don't think it would sink in the same way as, you know, even, you know, George Takei did his uh story of his detention camp recently.
Right.
And when I was showing it to some students, one of them, a very autistic student who's not fully verbal, he communicates through me, you know, he spells letters on a board, and has trouble with visuals because he doesn't stay still well enough. But he's got a really photographic memory. So I mean, this is one of the places where we discovered that he had less trouble with visuals than we thought, because he
Okay.
could, like, take that picture and then hold it in his head.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, we were just working on having conversations, because part of it was him being able to respond quickly in a typing type situation to be able to have a back and forth. So he always wanted to have really high-minded conversations, which his speech pathologist and OT were like smart enough to do, but didn't always know the material, right?
Ah,
So
right.
so it started becoming we would put together a packet of material for them for the next week's conversation. So when he
Yeah.
decided he wanted to talk about Japanese internment, I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
know the perfect way to make it easy for them. So I cut together like 10 pages. I showed them to him. He said, yeah, that's perfect. And we sent him off to them. And then when we got to the conversation, he shocked me because it became about the comic rather than the Japanese internment. And specifically, there's one page where they've just gotten to I think the Santa Anita race course was where they were taken first,
Mhm.
and they were staying in the horse stalls. And there's the panel of George and his brother going, "We get to live where the horses live." And right underneath it is the horror on his parents' faces of,
Right,
"We have to live where the horses live."
right, right.
And that panel, I mean, my student was already a self-described social justice warrior, but that panel, he said, like, brought home to him
Yeah,
more than anything he'd read in his history class, like exactly how crazy this situation was,
that's great that it got through. Yeah.
you know. Um,
Hmm.
and again, that's just, it's one of the inherent things in comics
So
is
your
that
school has embraced comics. It's at a
not as much as I'd like, but
okay.
my school does embrace teachers and even paraprofessionals like myself, um using any resource we can, so
Whatever works, basically. Huh?
right. So
Yeah.
even if I mean, and the school library has an impressive graphic novel selection. So it's not as much that we haven't embraced them as much as some high schools I know, and certainly not as much as some colleges I know. College level is probably where comics have been embraced the most at this point. Um, but we have class copies of Fahrenheit 451. We have class copies of Watchmen and Mouse and Persepolis and
Well, sure, it's a gradual process.
yeah.
So,
But it's a cool process to watch. Um, I hope that it actually gets there. Um, we'll take it back to you though, because I just jumped off. Sorry, I
that's
do that.
it's all right.
Um, one of the things I noticed as I was reading issues of Snarf is it looks like it kicked off a like line of humor anthologies that you were doing. Um, there would be
There
pages
was
in the
certainly
back
others
saying,
that followed. Yes.
right,
Um, my recollection is those were edited by others. I would
okay,
like, for example, Twist was edited by J.D. King,
yeah,
and Blab was Monty Beauchamp. Um, I can't remember offhand, but yes, early on I edited as many as I could, and as the company grew and the line grew, I first I hired an editor in chief, Dave Schreiner, and then ultimately other editorial staff. So there was, as the years went on, little hands-on editing that I did. It's just a necessity of growth.
right,
But I always wanted to be part of the process. When editorial meetings, I'd like to see things in advance and opine for whatever it was worth. I trust the editor, but I might say, "Oh, I love this new Joe Smith story, whatever." And I might also say, "I don't get this one." But at the end of the day, you have to trust your editors, as I trusted myself when I was working in a vacuum.
yeah.
Uh,
I think the
so
ones that caught my eye just because it made me wonder if you started kind of separating stories by is you had Bijou Funnies going, you had
yeah,
Bizarre
that was
Sex
Jay
going.
Lynch who,
Oh, that was all Jay Lynch.
yeah, I mean, technically Skip Williamson too, but my impression
Okay.
is always that Jay was the hands-on guy.
Okay. And then Bizarre Sex number one and two, and Homegrown Funnies. I'm trying to find there was one issue that I had an ad
Well,
that was
I,
all
th
about
I think
funny
even
comics.
Kitchen Sink might have been the only one of the big four underground publishers who would even credit the editors, even if it was in the fine print. Think we were the only ones that would also put the print number on when we would reprint. I always indicate if it was a second printing, third printing, 10th printing.
Right.
And so collectors appreciate it now, but at the time, I remember talking to rivals and they'd say, why even bother to do that? And I did it because I was a collector and I cared if it was a first printing or not. Um, so when you run your own company, you can be as idiosyncratic as you want. That's the
as you want.
point.
Right. But when you were, I mean, because how did how many stories were coming in through submission versus how many were ones that you ordered,
Well, I would
so to
say
speak?
always, there's always stuff coming over the transom. The you can't stop people from submitting, and
Right.
we would every day there would be something in the mailbox, sometimes several, and early on I would look at everything conscientiously, but it became just pointless when, first of all, the percentage of things that would arrive that would be both well written and drawn well enough and the right proportion and just all the
Right.
things were relatively small. But some publishers just ignore blind submissions altogether because they just go, oh, that stuff's junk. But we would find gems that way. And I always insisted that even when I couldn't do it myself, that somebody look carefully at it and anything that was borderline be at least discussed at editorial meetings. The one I'll never forget is one day opening the mail and there was a mission from a totally unknown Mark Schultz. And it was the genesis for what became Xenozoic Tales in a very raw form. And I just remember as soon as I saw the art and the concept, and I turned to my editor in chief, Dave, and I said, follow up on this one. This one looks great. And of course, it was. It was a little raw at the beginning, but again, you have to have the eye to see what this can evolve into. And I asked Mark later, I said, did you only send it to us? And he said, no, I sent out the same package. I think he said to 5 or 6 publishers. We were the only one that responded. And that blew my mind. It's like
Yeah.
nobody else was either bothering to look or they just didn't see the
Didn't see
potential.
it. Well, I mean,
And that's why it's tough if you're trying to break in and you don't know if you put all this effort into sending a package. Is anybody going to open it who actually will look at it, or will it be some intern whose job is to take it out, put it in the stamped return envelope, and throw it back in the mail? It's tough. Um,
well, and it's always one of the things I think about even with publishers today, perhaps especially with publishers today, is I mean, there are two ways to look at a story that comes to you. It's, will this be profitable with as little work on my part as possible? Or is this so good that I can make it profitable?
right.
And I think there are a lot less people who are willing to do that latter one. That I believe in this, so I'm going to find a way to make it
Yeah.
profitable.
What the trend we've seen in certainly more recent years is that conventions, the larger publishers will have portfolio reviews.
Right.
And those are nice if you're strictly an illustrator. Usually you don't go to those saying, I write and draw, here's a full story. Usually it's just I can draw. And more often than not, it's I can draw superheroes. But at least there is that process. There's nothing really comparable for someone who wants to write comics or who wants to write and draw, where you need someone to put a little more time into it. If I'm in a portfolio review, I can tell instantly, if this person is close to making the grade or may never. And you try to give encouragement. And of course, you try to find something encouraging with everyone. You don't want to insult them, but more often than not, it's a tough process. And a lot of these people are just never going to make it to the professional level. They might be good amateurs and do
Right.
self-published zines forever and maybe even successfully, but they may not meet the standards of a company that's trying to reach a larger audience. What I tried to do with prospective writers was also at least make sure someone on the staff read 3 or 4 pages of a proposal, not just glance at the title or again, just give it short shrift. It's like give this person a chance. And the same way you would an artist who might not quite be there, give helpful suggestions. Um, After a while, I stopped looking at art because it was awkward for me to come up with creative ways to say positive things and yet not overly encourage them because sometimes, you could just tell this person wanted so much to be an artist, but if they were 14 or 15 and showed me that work, I'd go, hey, this is very promising. But if you're 26 and
Right.
I don't think you're going to get much better.
Well, and
So
s-
that
something
that was
Paul,
emotionally tough for me. I don't like putting a rejection stamp on something when I'm looking that person in the eyes. No.
something that Paul Levitz has talked about with us
Yeah.
is that it also became a point where he's like, I have to be careful about even small talk because I'm me. And it's like I'm not trying to say that in a big-headed way because for me, I don't think of myself as me. But if you're the lowly guy
Right.
and I go, oh, I barely know you, but oh, I really like this. Maybe I only kind of like that. Maybe you should be focusing on all sorts of other things. But Paul Levitz just told you,
Right. I know. I know.
you know,
Uh,
um, so he even takes that seriously now. I mean, he's on the board at Boom, and I couldn't get him to talk at all about anything coming forward at Boom because he's like, we're doing a lot of great stuff, but
sure.
I don't want to be putting my finger on the. I'll talk about stuff that's already finished in years in the past.
Understood. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I I also understood very early on how you can't be flip in rejecting something. There's one submission I will never forget because I learned a valuable lesson from it. This was in the early days when I would open every submission and look at it, and usually I tried to write at least a short letter or note about why it was rejected. And this person sent I think it was a 4 or 5 page story, and it started out with a rock band and a story that was making sense. It wasn't badly drawn. But when we got to, I think, the second or third page, the voice balloons, instead of the dialogue that had been started, the dialogue was filled with the words NGOG, NGOG over and over. So it was like Nagog, Nagog, Nagog. And I was like, what the fuck is this? Was this person in the middle of their story taking a weird drug or something? Was it intentionally surrealistic? What? I didn't understand the point. So I it wasn't usable, but in the letter I sent back, it was like, Dear Larry, I thought your story started out really great, but then Nagog, 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 and then I signed it and mailed it, thinking I was funny. Well, the person got my note back, and because my phone number was on the letterhead, called me and they were quite angry. Apparently, I had totally misunderstood the purpose of this, and my letter was just kind of a ugly fuck you to them, and I didn't mean that. I was
right.
being flip. And once I realized, okay, first of all, this is my home number. I shouldn't be letting it out. But also, I still think that person was probably crazy on some level. And I don't want to be giving bad news to people who might be volatile. So from that day, I created the character Steve Krupp. And it came from Krupp Comic Works, the corporate name. And I actually even created a rubber stamp with a signature. And so every rejection letter from then on was signed by Steve Krupp.
Steve Crow.
And he ultimately evolved into a character of mine. Um,
I love it.
so again, it comes down to you have to show respect even to people who are just barely able to send you something. You have to still reject it respectfully.
So what was Nagog supposed to mean?
I
Or
still
did
don't
that
know. I
not actually
wish,
come out?
well, in those days we didn't have a photocopier, but I wish I had a copy of it that I could actually reread now. Um, but there are a lot of strange submissions in those days, and a lot of because our readers were largely hippies, the presumption was they would go to the head shop, buy the comics, go back, light up, and they would be in some stage of enhancement when they read the stories, and that could affect their interpretation. And at the same time, I realized, okay, people doing these submissions also, for all I know, they're tripping their brains out when they came up with this idea. And you can't always know that context, but in those days, um, it was certainly a factor. I mean, we would even get submissions, and people would even have a rolled up joint in the submission as kind of a bribe. It's like, hey man, hope you enjoy my story and hope you enjoy the gift too. And I mean, we would accept the bribe. It still wouldn't, I don't think, affect my judgment, but
You mean you didn't send it back with the self-assessment?
not if it was weed. We sometimes would get pills in the mail. I never trusted any pill. Those went in the trash. But
Right. So
it, it was a different time, and it's hard, I think, for someone a lot younger than me to try to put themselves in that position. But it was a unique time in our
yeah.
history, and a lot
That's
going
actually one of
on.
the reasons I like to read underground comics. I, I go back and forth on how much I enjoy them, but I always learn from them. Um,
Well, it was
y-
the first rebellion against the establishment within the comics industry.
right,
Um, and it was also, again, everything's in a historical context, but it was a point in time when poor cartoonists could pull together enough money and have something printed. Prior to our generation, I mean, the color newsstand comics, you had to print those in six-figure print runs, often
right,
1 million or more, but minimally, a couple 100,000 or so, and in color, and these were very expensive. The black and white comics revolution and the offset printing revolution, those were critical to being able to have an alternative. Um, and
what,
again, it's
what,
those things you don't necessarily think of. You almost have to have a timeline when you look at things. And in underground comics, you had this generation that was the first to say, our country's at war, but we don't think it's a just war.
right.
Before that, you just
That had
were,
never, I mean, at least
yeah,
not on a large scale, been
on a lot,
considered.
right. There are always some conscientious objectors, but
Right,
on a large scale, my generation said, hell no, we won't go.
right,
And that affected a lot of things. And it was also when, again, marijuana had been surreptitiously consumed going back to at least the 20s.
right,
And if you were in jazz circles or in
right,
certain, but we were the first generation to openly kind of flaunt it. We were also grappling with, obviously civil rights was still an ongoing issue, but women's liberation and gay liberation, those were new
right.
things that were making headlines, all rolled up in a period of time when young cartoonists suddenly had a platform that they
Right.
never had before.
Right. Um, and it continues to this day that the cartooning is always a
Yeah, and
platform that,
the way it's
but
blossomed now,
yeah,
it's hard for me sometimes to go to especially the conventions like SPX or MoCA or CXC, where you see a lot of small publishers, self-publishers, largely young creators who are, there's so much wonderful stuff happening. It's blossomed in a way that
Right.
there are now comics for everybody,
Yeah.
as you alluded earlier. And you know, that's great. I I I don't think I could have predicted comics would become that ingrained in the culture. Um,
Well, I mean, and this is where I have the outsider perspective and the later perspective, but they always have been. You know, how many people learn to read on the Sunday Funnies?
Certainly right. You go back to the earliest newspaper comics and immigrants and
Right.
things like the Yellow Kid and Thomas
Right.
Nast having
Right.
an impact because the words and pictures made it a lot easier.
Right. Um, I mean, what I see as revolutionary in this era, and we're still not there, is we're getting closer to a point where comics aren't thought of as like trash art.
Right. No, it's true. I was just
We're
telling
getting
my wife
closer
literally
to
yesterday, somehow it came up when I first got to know Harvey Kurtzman. And you know, obviously from as early as I could remember his work from Mad and Trump and Humbug, etc. I was a huge fan of his. So when I got to know him and I was asking him all these questions, and one of the things he told me that shocked me until I really thought about it was in when he first married his wife Adele in I think around 1950, and they had children and they, you know, bought a home, getting to know neighbors, and he said when they would go to like neighborhood parties and you're introducing yourselves, and the first question is, you know, what do you do for a living? And people would give normal occupations. And he said when he had to tell a stranger or a new friend what he did, he would always say, I'm in the publishing field. He said, I wouldn't dare say I was in comic books. He said they would have, their faces would have turned white. They'd turn away. It was not a reputable field. And even though he and Will Eisner and a handful of people saw it as an art form and saw the potential, the average person on the street, if they knew anything about comics, they would say they're trash. They're for kids.
right, right,
It's 10-cent throwaway. I remember as a kid watching movies and the rare occasion where a comic book would even be seen in a movie. One in particular, I remember there was some cops and robbers show where somebody would the mob kidnapped somebody and they put him in a room and closed the door and they put this thug to guard the door. He was just the tough, the dumb guy.
right. So of course he
And
pulled out a comic
as
book
soon
to
as
read.
the boss walked away, he pulled out a comic book and was reading it. And that was the symbol to the
Right,
audience. This guy's a dope. Because what adult would be reading a children's comic book?
right.
So yeah, we've come a long way, baby. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Well, and I
uh,
mean, people like you are part of that. People like you who looked at uh, different things that could be done in comics, said this is great art, even if other publishers aren't seeing it. Um,
well, I'll take that compliment now. I couldn't have for a long time. I think with age you get some better sense of looking back, and
yeah,
I feel very lucky that I was in a position where, you know, it's always time and place and opportunity, but I took advantage of an opportunity and let it grow. Don't look back with any regrets and a million things I do differently, but it worked out. And it was an exciting time. And just like I think somebody just breaking in now could say the same thing. It's an exciting time to be in comics. Because basically, again, comics are just a form of self-expression. And
Right.
there are people who make comics who probably have the skills to have gone into making films or editing a magazine or illustrating a book, any number of things. But the
Right.
particular set of skills and passion, as we
Right.
discussed, is
Right.
you make the best of it because once you make those choices, some
So,
people will change careers midstream, but pretty much, okay, this is the course I'm taking, and you go as far as you can. When I started my first self-published comic, I could never have imagined that I'd still be involved in that field 50 years, 60 years later. Um, it's just like, okay, for the next few months, this is what I'm going to do. Then I don't know what I'm going to do. I majored in journalism, so in the back of my head was always, I'll work for a newspaper, but doing comics was fun. And then when I realized, wow, I can actually pay my rent doing this, it's like, okay, I don't want to work for a newspaper anymore.
right.
And actually, the truth is, I actually, right after graduation, went to the Milwaukee Journal and I didn't get hired. It almost forced my hand.
Right.
Um, Not that I even tried at other papers, but the point
Right.
is, one small change like that, and I could have been a beat reporter or something for the rest of my life.
Well, and
So
then you could have been Denny O'Neil, gotten tired of being a beat reporter and maybe made up a story or two. I'm not guaranteeing that that happened, but I've heard.
yeah. Yes, what I want to get across to anybody younger who might be listening, who is thinking that they have aspirations in this field, is, you know, there's not one set way to break in, and
Right.
sometimes you might
That's
want
even less true today than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You know, the bar for entry is, can you take a picture of what you drew and put it on Instagram?
huh,
I mean, literally.
yeah,
I know
no,
people who are serious, like, I know people who read comics as much as I do, who read almost exclusively in Instagram comics.
wow.
You know, I mean, I spend 2 or 3 hours a day reading comics,
Well,
you know.
I do hear that. It's alien to me because that to me is not. I
No,
like to hold. I like to hold
I
the
do
paper.
too.
Yeah.
Though,
Yeah.
as I run out of space, I've been going more and more digital with a lot of even the things that, like, if I love it, I'll go want to hold the paper. But a lot of my like weekly comic habit has become digital just because it's like, where do I put all the boxes?
Yeah, no, I understand. And not everybody has unlimited shelves to keep accumulating paper.
Yeah. I just buttered you up big time. So now I'm going to ask one of my favorite questions to ask to people who got to be decision makers, and it's your opportunity to be humble. Tell
Hmm.
me about a swing and miss, even if it was like not a full swing and miss. It was you said no, and one of your editors said, "No, no, Dennis, you got to see this is a we got to do this."
Um, there are several, but I think the one that stings the most was Chris Ware.
Okay.
Chris sent me, he was working for a college paper in, I believe, Austin, Texas, sent me three or four of the newspapers with his work and then Xeroxes of a few others. And I remember getting it, looking at it, and talking with Dave, my editor in chief. And I said, I really like this kid. I think he's almost there. I said, keep an eye on him. He's almost there. Well, um, I think he must have next sent it to, was it Drawn and Quarterly?
Run a
Who,
quarterly.
and not much later, like six
Right.
months later, or whatever. And so instead of really keeping an eye on him or keeping in touch, he slipped away. And what I should have done, I should have said, hey, this guy's good enough. Let's put him in the next Nerf, but I
Right.
didn't.
Right.
So yeah, that one hurt. Um,
Well,
but
Chris is such a fascinating artist. I sometimes need to pull together like Chris Ware Roundtable because he represents still the pinnacle of the cartoonist that I want to love more than I actually do yet. Does that
I know,
make sense?
I do know because it's so formal and it's kind of
Right,
imposing and so architecturally rigid and everything that
right,
it's not as emotionally inviting.
right. And
Um,
every time I reread something, I will see more and I will like it more, but I still feel like I'm like outside the club, that like I don't get it the way other people get it.
yep. No, I understand. And I remember talking to Will Eisner about this, and he had Siegel and Schuster's Superman proposal
Okay.
when he was packaging comics, and he rejected it.
Right.
So that's one where he goes,
Yeah.
what was, but it was pretty raw when you
Right.
think of what it looked like back then. Schuster wasn't the greatest artist, and um, but anyway, yeah. So that's the one that jumps out. But there were a good number of them over the years where I remember rejecting, thinking someone wasn't quite there yet, and then a short time later, I would see them published by someone else and go, oh, I was a little too hard on them. And part of it is I think I have a kind of a perfectionist nature, and
Right.
I needed to learn that 80 or 90% there sometimes was good enough to introduce them because people need to grow. And and expecting somebody to just land on my lap close to 100% was unrealistic.
Well, and I mean, even when they do, they're gonna grow. Um, I mean, we have a weekly Love and Rockets book club. There's almost weekly.
Hmm,
We've got lives, so sometimes we'll have to take a week off,
right.
but we're 40 issues in now. And, what always makes me just like my head explode with each new issue is like that first issue where we're talking about how perfect Jaime was. And he's better in issue 40 than he was in issue 1. Um, I talked to Nate Powell yesterday about um his new punk rock book and his upcoming
Yeah.
Lies My Teacher Told Me. And when he described his new punk rock book as the book that he'd been writing his whole life, I immediately,
Hmm.
because I've recently been revisiting, he put out a collection of his early comics, stuff that he did in college and whatnot. And a lot of them are punk rock, but he hasn't developed the language that he has now. He
Uh,
hasn't he hasn't opened up his page styles. He hasn't been willing to what makes his fall through work so well is putting lyrics in like bursts of sound or all sorts of things that early early Nate Powell didn't. He was still very much in his panels and word balloons, and he hadn't grown enough to be able to
Absolutely.
do that yet.
And it's a perfect example of how, I mean, we see the ones we call the greats and the geniuses, but early on, no one starts out a full-blown genius.
Right.
Um,
Well, I mean, Jaime came close.
Perhaps he was pretty young and pretty great. And there's another one. By the way, that one stings for a different reason because when they self-published the first issue, they sent it to Fantagraphics. No, they sent it to the Comics Journal to get a review. And because Gary Groth had a publishing company and a journal of criticism, he got to see it first.
Oh,
And then he went, hey, I'll publish this. And I remember thinking to myself, that's an unfair advantage. But at the same time, I don't want to start a journal of criticism,
right,
but I can see where that would be a magnet for new
right.
talent.
Yeah,
And Gary's milked that very well over the years.
yeah,
So again, the game always changes in subtle ways that
yeah,
affects who lands where.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So tell me about your favorite find.
Favorite find. Um,
The one where you saw it and maybe even the people around you weren't
I
seeing it.
would say I'm going to. I could say several, but I'm going to say Howard Cruz because when I first published Barefoots in probably Snarf or
Yeah,
one of the others,
I think it was
um,
Snarf number 2. I think I was reading
yeah,
it this morning.
his character was in a deliberate Bigfoot kind of a parody of a daily strip that was very off-putting to some people, and it was
I
especially off.
loved that first one.
Well, but it was especially off-putting to some of my contemporaries, like specifically Art Spiegelman and Bill Griffith,
Okay.
who gave me shit about publishing. They hated it. They didn't think it belonged in underground comics. And I said, okay, I can see why the style might be off-putting, but have you actually read it? It's really clever. Read his stories. And of course, as the years went by, the critics started to shut up. But
Right.
early on, I published him knowing that I was going to get um, criticism from people I respected who were my
Right.
peers. So it's a question of trusting my taste over the catcalls.
See, that's a funny criticism, just in terms of like I Barefoots. I was literally this morning was the first time I ever read any Barefoots,
Okay.
and I liked the first one better than the other ones. I still liked the other ones, but
Okay.
I found myself going, I wish it had kept that comic strip form.
Ah.
Maybe had a Sunday bigger one every once in a while, but I thought it worked best in this, compact building on each other, but rather than trying to tell the 8-page story, the 5-page panels. And again, I haven't read them all. I was working quick
Well,
because I knew I was talking to you in an hour.
now that you have discovered it, there's a collection of all the Barefoots
Okay.
that I think Fantagraphics put out, and there's there's several Howard Cruz compilations, but he's someone I would definitely recommend readers who aren't familiar with him, or maybe they've seen Stuck Rubber Baby, his
Yeah.
masterpiece, but they haven't seen the earlier funny stuff. And they may not even know he's funny because Stuck Rubber Baby is not a
Is not funny.
funny book. So,
But yeah, no, I hadn't thought of Howard Cruz as funny before that. So when I saw, oh, Howard Cruz is in Snarf, this is going to be interesting, and it was.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was. Thank you
And
for
there's a
sharing that.
guy who thought he was going to become a playwright.
Okay.
That was his aspiration, and so he ended up taking obviously a different turn. But those writing skills he had honed certainly show up in everything he's ever done. The writing is generally a level above almost anything else out there.
Right.
Um,
I mean,
another,
I think that that's not actually a totally uncommon route to comics. Particularly in this era, we have more and more people who grew up on comics who want to do comics. But it seems like in previous eras, you, you certainly had people who wanted to do comic strips and felt like they had to do comics, or people who wanted to be novelists and felt like they could only do comics. But you also had people who set out to be novelists or do comic strips or playwrights or whatnot who discovered that the stories that they actually wanted to tell needed comics. I feel like Eisner kind of, I don't know if he ever said it explicitly, but he feels like he fell into that category where he would have been the commercial artist or whatever, but he was drawn to telling these stories that weren't going to easily be told in any other form.
yeah, and it's funny you mention that because, well, I'll give you an incident that to me encapsulates. I was at I think Chicago Comic Con one year where Will was a guest, and there was a line of fans signing whatever new book was out. And I was there just kind of crowd control, standing next to him. And, everyone has their 15, 20, 30 seconds while he's signing it or personalizing it, and they may get a comment or quick question in. And most people I observed were saying, "Oh, Will, I love your art," or "Mr. Eisner, I should say, I love your art." And he'd go, "Thank you, thank you." And then at one point, first person came along and they said, "Mr. Eisner, I love your writing." And he perked up and he stood up and he looked that person in the eye and he said, "Thank you very much." He said, "That's the best compliment I can get." And I asked him about that later, and he basically said, and this isn't true, but he said, anybody can draw. But he said, now writing, that takes skill. And I just thought, he so took for granted his own drawing skill that for him, I think it was harder to get the writing chops and to master those. And he felt that was a skill that took more work for him. And
Right.
thus he appreciated the compliment more. Whereas you could tell him a million times how it was the greatest feathering and brush strokes in the world, and he just, anybody could do that.
Well, in his writing, I mean, even if you read The Spirit, his writing gets better. His writing, I think, evolves more than his art does. His art would evolve again when he jumped from like superhero comics to um
Well, and as a truism,
the
that's,
graphic
I mean,
novel
I think
stuff.
you take almost anyone, and even outside of comics,
Right.
actor, director, author. If you don't get better, I think there's something wrong.
Right.
I think you learn from each thing you create, and that whether it's a hand-eye coordination, and you just learn to perfect certain techniques. You learn to write more efficiently, etc. You're always getting a little better, and a true fan who's following it from beginning to end, will perceive it. For a lot of people, it's a body of work and it's not under a microscope. But
I think
I
there's
hear you.
I think in any field, and I know you're a baseball guy too, and I'm gonna use a baseball story. Um, I remember reading an article in Fangraphs probably at this point 5 or 6 years ago, but it was after Trout's fourth his fourth great season.
Mhm.
Um, and it pointed out that one of the things that made Trout so good was every time a weakness was identified, like after his first season, it was like, oh, he can't hit the fastball up and in.
Mhm.
Like he's way worse in that area than anything else. By the middle of the next season, it was a strength. You
Yeah.
didn't throw him a fastball up and in unless you wanted to watch it fly 400 feet.
Yeah.
Shohei Ohtani has been like that as well. Um, so I think what you're telling me about Eisner is he identified himself. This art thing comes easy to me. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that he didn't evolve in an artist, but he's like
Right.
writing that's hard.
Yeah.
So he put his energy into writing, and by the time he gets a contract with God, he's an amazing writer.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
speaking of baseball, before we lose that thread, I want to
yeah,
thank you for wearing your Milwaukee Brewers cap.
you're welcome.
Out of, I guess, respect to me being on the show today.
I had to debate between the Milwaukee Braves and the Brewers, and I decided that even though I'm a diehard Cub fan, you got the Brewers today.
And thank you. I'm sure some of your readers are going, what is that hat? They don't even know what
Yeah,
it's.
well, they can't see it because we're audio only.
Oh, well, then even more so. I appreciate it.
It was just for you.
Thank you.
I still have my Greg Maddux on the Cubs sweatshirt on.
Yeah. Well, I found there aren't that many people I know who are deep into comics and deep into baseball. Um,
There are a few of us. We
yeah,
talked the last time, and you weren't able to join our annual comics and baseball roundtable. I hope that you'll be able to join us this year. We
perhaps.
generally do it in November.
If you don't know, Mark Schultz is another one who would
Yeah,
probably.
you told me that before, and
Yeah.
I need to hit you up for contact
Oh,
information with
sure,
him
absolutely.
because we I should talk to him. But that also means I have to go read his stuff because I discovered Mark Schultz because of you. I have holes in my comic fandom as well.
Hey,
There's
there's
too
so
many to
much.
manage to read everything.
Oh, I know. It's
Um,
when I was young, it was possible, or it seemed possible.
well,
Um,
I think it was certainly possible to read everything that was good.
yes, a good way to put it.
I mean, because now not only do I have 100 years of whatever was good from that 100 years, but I've said it before. I'll say it again. Chris Condon, who writes a fantastic book called That Texas Blood, and is contributing some of the stories to the new EC stuff at Oni. And I agreed one day that we're in the platinum era of comics. We're in the era where if you are a true comic fan and you just love comics that are good, no matter what genre they are, whatever, you can't keep up.
Right. I'm also gratified to see a lot of the old great stuff has been reprinted for years. I was part of that, but as the years have gone by, I've noticed things that would have been considered too obscure
Yeah.
are now being reprinted, partly because it's public domain, but also because there's enough of a cult following for these things. Like I remember as a kid growing up the Atlas horror comics when Marvel was not Marvel yet, but they
Right.
were putting out those horror stories that often had Ditko and Kirby and some of the recognizable names, but also the Joe Maneelys and the people who nobody
Joe
remembered.
Maneely just got
And
a book of his art from Fantagraphics.
yes, I just saw that, and that's what triggered it
When
was,
when I
wow,
talked to
even
Howard Chaykin, he'd just been sent a preview copy and he was just glowing over
exactly.
it.
And I was excited to see that too, and I'm going to order it because those are the comics that creeped me out when I was a little kid, and I might have to read under the covers with a flashlight, and then I started sleeping. But now I want to reread them because
Yeah.
I haven't seen them in so long. To the some may hold up, and others, I'll go, what
Well,
was
and
the thing? But
as much
at
as
least it's available.
yeah, as much as I agree with you that I love to be able to hold the physical object in my hands, that's also what I love about, and it's going through hiccups right now as Amazon like killed the great Comixology and rolled it into Kindle, and nobody else has quite managed to
Right.
fill that. But the more we digitize, because there's nothing that frustrates me more than like, I mean, we were talking about Chris Ware. For the longest
Mhm.
time, I couldn't read a lot of good Chris Ware because you just couldn't find it.
Oh,
I
really?
wasn't
Oh,
there in the moment.
got it. Got it.
I wasn't there in the moment to buy Acme Novelty Library #1, and
Yeah.
nobody's selling their copies for less than an arm and a leg.
You have to buy that big expensive box that has everything in
Right. Well, and
it.
when I first started looking for some of those, they hadn't been reprinted at all.
That surprises me. You think
You
there would be
know,
enough demand? Huh.
I
Well,
mean, again, now I first started looking for them 10 or 20 years ago.
okay.
I missed them by some, not a lot. I missed Love and Rockets by some, not a lot. Um, I mean, I was so happy when they put out their first 50 collection for Love and Rockets. I've never been more happy to spend $400 on one item than to get hardcovers of the first 50 issues of
And
Love and Rockets.
I just want to say one thing about Love and Rockets because you mentioned how beautiful Jaime's work has been from the start. I always want to give kudos to Gilbert because
Oh, yes.
I love Gilbert's work.
And
In most cases, I would say more, and he doesn't get the credit he.
Gilbert is actually the better writer, I think.
Yeah, that's what my feeling is too. So
And his art very quickly becomes
yeah,
You know, those first few issues, there's a huge difference between Jaime and Gilbert. And by
Yeah.
the time you get to Heartbreak Soup, but particularly Human Dystrophism and um Poison River, uh Gilbert's art has absolutely caught up. Yeah, no, I don't want to.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that is sibling rivalry,
You know, there's some
Like,
indication that there was some,
yeah.
though I remember in one of the letter pages, Gilbert actually said that it was it was almost anti-silver rivalry. It was because Jaime was getting all the attention, he was able to just do what he wanted to do
Ah, okay.
and not worry about what people thought about it.
Sure. Sure.
Because early on, Gilbert was doing like those really, because initially it was the Love and Rockets and it was supposed to have more of that sci-fi bent. So, Gilbert was doing errata stigmata
Okay.
and some weird stuff that's good, but like when Gilbert hit his stride was when he got to Pelham.
Right. Exactly. I totally agree.
And I think he didn't feel like he could have gone to Palomar if Jaime wasn't a rock star already.
Well, speaking of cartoonists who are brothers, I think it's easy to forget that Robert Crumb probably never would have become a cartoonist had his older brother not forced him to do comics. And that's how
I
he
had
got
no
his
idea.
chops.
I've never heard this story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, his older brother Charles was mentally ill, but was a very good cartoonist who was obsessed in a OCD way with comics. And he wanted to put out this zine, and he forced his younger brother Robert to learn so that they could get a zine out faster. And
Oh, wow.
so Robert dutifully did what his older brother said and fairly quickly became better.
Right.
And then that depressed his older brother,
Of
who
course.
was already mentally, ill.
Well, I
And
mean, you were talking about
he never
from
recovered.
being on the spectrum, that's absolutely something that tends to run in families. So it's entirely possible, just based on the little that you've told me, that he was just further on the spectrum at a time where they didn't understand that at all.
Not at
So
all.
so the mental illness could have been on some level. He just looked at the world very differently, and the world didn't know how to handle that.
Yeah.
Um, which is a form of mental illness, but I mean, I think that's one of the things that I love about the world we live in today, even as it's pushed back on by a lot of people, is we've acknowledged, or at least large portions of it have acknowledged, that normal is a really wishy-washy word, and there are a lot of different ways to look at healthy.
Exactly.
A lot of different ways to look at healthy.
Exactly.
Um, that sounds like a perfect place to wrap up for today. Dennis, I hope we can do this again. I always
Sure.
love chatting with you. Actually, I read about something this morning because you're in Massachusetts, right?
Yep.
Did you know that in Worcester, Mass, there's a baseball and poetry festival?
I have not heard about that.
Yeah, I read about it this morning. Let me see if I can pull it up really well. I'll pull it up in a second after I am done recording. But yes, there's a poetry and baseball festival in
Wow.
because it's where what's his name? The Casey at the Bat guy
Oh, it originated there. Oh,
originated there.
I did
But
not know.
apparently I mean, and one of my favorite poems is Ferlinghetti's Baseball Canto. Um,
Ah,
so I
yeah.
already knew that there was for that matter, Ogden Nash also had the ABCs of baseball that was
Oh,
fantastic. Um, but apparently there's
okay.
a much bigger baseball poetry crossover than I had previously realized. So when I
Yeah.
read about that in one of my baseball newsletters this morning, I went, "Oh, I should tell Dennis about this."
Yeah.
Because
I,
actually, poetry in comics is something that we see intermittently and
um,
and has a lot of potential that I think
yeah, I mean,
hasn't been explored.
there are poetic comics, but
Yeah,
you don't usually, I can't remember overtly, you know,
right,
poetry hyphen comics,
right.
but
There
why
was
not?
a what was it called? There was briefly a poetry comics like zine called um Ink something a while ago, but they stopped getting enough submissions. Matt
Well,
Madden wrote
hmm.
a fantastic poetry comic called Walker, which used there's a type of poem where you use the same lines and rearrange them in different ways. So he
Oh,
wrote that number of panels,
yeah.
and then each page uses the same panels in
Okay.
a different order and like changes like the background and foreground a little bit, but the character itself is in the exact same um
Well, that's an intriguing thing. I haven't seen that.
yeah.
Uh,
I'll dig it up and send you a link.
yeah,
Um,
thank you. Uh,
but so yeah, for 22 panels, this is Dennis Kitchen again. It's always a pleasure. And we
well,
will
you're fun talking to also, Ted, and
thank you.
I look forward to it again on maybe another general topic that we'll quickly get off topic on, but
That's what I love.
that's what
That,
conversations are, right?
that's why I didn't think of like a hardcore general topic because I
Right.
figured that we'd find a way.
Sure.
So we will see you after the next page.
All right.
Hey guys, this is Tyler from 22 Panels. I'm here to tell you all about our Patreon. If you enjoy this show, please consider donating to our Patreon to keep this show going. We have many different tiers, all different levels to help you decide what's right for you. Okay, so get on out there to patreon.com/22 Panels Podcast.